We do have a long arm now that allows us to destroy Russian tactical aviation, not systematically, but periodically and steadily. If we talk about strategic aviation, the Russians have a dilemma. But the A-50 is a painful loss for the Russians. Here we must emphasize the impossibility of building anything like this. The declared A-100 claiming to be of the next generation is a myth. It is propaganda.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. And I'm your host, Matt Wickham. And in this episode, we discuss the recent surge in taken down and destroyed Russian planes and how Ukraine is making Russia's air operations on and near the front line an absolute nightmare. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and don't forget to press subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any of our videos in the future. In less than 2 weeks, from February the 17th to the 29th, the Ukrainian Air Force managed to destroy 13 Russian warplanes, including a long-range radar detection plane and control aircraft, fighters and bombers. Much talk has been on this subject, with experts taking their view on what the weapon of choice by Ukraine could have been and what the significance is. In this episode, we will speak to our first speaker, Oleksandr Kovalenko, military and political observer of the Information Resistance Group, who will go into the current air operations ongoing near the front line and current challenges Ukraine faces against Russia's Air Force. Let's take a listen.
If in 2023 we cleared the Black Sea of the Russian naval component, in 2024 there are good prospects of dealing with the airspace. A big problem for us is that the Russian aviation has a dominance in the airspace, even in the airspace of temporarily occupied territories. They massively use guided aerial bombs, which is a big problem for us. A big problem for us is Russian Cubs. It is very difficult to counteract them. We're just beginning this countering process. We do have a long arm now that allows us to destroy Russian tactical aviation, not systematically, but periodically and steadily. Now we can observe how the component of the frontline bombers with the function of the Su-34 fighter, the main carrier of Cubs, guided aerial bombs, is destroyed. Unfortunately, Russia still has enough of this aircraft, up to about 80 units, and they may not spare them. They cannot do otherwise, because if they stop using Cubs, they won't be able to attack. If they stop using Cubs, they won't be even able to hold the defense, because this is the main element that opens up our fortifications, that breaks through our defense line. If we take counter-attacking actions, they try to suppress any of our initiatives with Cubs. So for them it is a kind of a magical element that saves them in any case.
Kovalenko tells when discussing strategic aviation, the Russians face a dilemma as they grapple with production limitations, relying on repair and modernization for their Tu-95MS bombers, while attempting to simulate construction for the Tu-22M3 and Tu-160 components using Soviet-era stock, a process that falls short of genuine production efficiency. Let's see what he has to say.
If we talk about strategic aviation, the Russians have a dilemma. For example, they cannot build their Tu-95MS strategic bombers at all. They have no production capacity. They can only repair and modernize them. And every loss of Tu-95MS, the main missile carrier, for example, for Ha-101 or 555, is an irreversible loss, a critical loss. On the other hand, they have Tu-22M3 and Tu-160 components. They're trying to simulate construction now as if they can produce these planes. But actually, it is not quite so. They rather use the stock left over from the times of the Soviet Union than produce them. And it is on their basis that They are trying to reproduce a new aircraft. In fact, they use or modernize an old aircraft, which would need repairing, or use the body, the fuselage, which was prepared at the time of the Soviet Union and has been standing all this time for 30 years, waiting for its time. So they simulate production from scratch, a completely closed loop production, rather than actually produce in a closed loop. Besides, Tu-22M3 is an aircraft that mainly uses Ha-22-32 missiles. They are rarely used, and every loss of this aircraft is quite painful for the Russian aviation, and Tu-160s are hardly ever used for strikes on the territory of Ukraine. First, it is expensive to use this aircraft. For after each flight, it requires quite serious servicing, sometimes even repairs to prepare for the next flight. And it does not have the same effect of using a missile component as, for example, 295 MS, which is much cheaper to use. However, it isn't cheap either. And in fact, these are their three main strategic aviation components. But the A-50 is a painful loss for the Russians, because the Russians can't build either. They don't have A-50 production. They can only repair and modernize them. At the time of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russians had only 9 more or less combat-capable planes. One was undergoing modernization for a long time, 2 needed repair work, then one was damaged with a drone strike in Machulishi in Belarus. Its radar system, Shmel, has been damaged, and it is still being repaired. This, by the way, is another example of the fact that they have very big problems with the technical and technological component, and even repairing is very difficult for them. And accordingly, they have lost 2 planes since the beginning of 2024. Now they claim that they have upgraded one of the A-50s. That is, in my opinion, it is quite suspicious that their modernization suddenly ended just when they lost 2 A-50 aircraft. That is, it is more like a kind of demonstration that although we have lost one, we have another one here and we can produce them as many as we want. Actually, they cannot. Even the modernization of one plane takes 2-3 years. As for the modernized plane, there was a question about whether they would be able to finish the process due to sanctions, because part of the equipment installed on these planes has components of foreign origin, electronic components, microchips, semiconductors, etc. So the question was whether they would be able to complete this modernization. And the question remains, because the way they presented the completion of modernization was more likely just a propaganda, PR campaign, and the modernization process itself may not be complete.
With increasing warnings from politicians and military personnel about the potential confrontation between Russia and NATO member states, Kovalenko assures how Russia's air capability would swiftly be dismantled within a matter of days if Russia so dared. Let's take a listen.
Throughout a little more than 2 years of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russians have demonstrated that their aviation component can represent a terrorist element in the first place, and not a full-fledged military component with a high level of efficiency, with a coefficient of effectiveness in air combat or in execution of combat tasks at the front tactical level. Therefore, if we're talking about the confrontation between the Russian aviation and the aviation of the countries of the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, here it is clear that Russia will very quickly lose its main functionality, its aerospace forces, probably in a matter of days rather than of weeks. And therefore, it now manages to dominate the airspace of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine solely due to the fact that Ukraine doesn't have the tools to counter Russian aviation that NATO countries have. If we had these tools, Russia would have been left without an aviation component long ago.
Next, we have Petro Chernyk, military expert and colonel of the armed forces of Ukraine, who delves into the intricacies of radar technology, highlighting its historical significance and its pervasive presence in Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
Let's first of all consider radar. It's an unprecedented phenomenon in world history. The Americans were the first to build the AWACS system back in the 1960s. What is it for? We are well aware that everything around us, without exception, is radar. The world around us is woven from radio fabric. This is the most difficult part of physics. It was concluded that everything can be calculated. And this, by the way, was tested during World War II, primarily by the British, who installed in their Lancasters unique systems with radio detection of everything that can be studied in this space. Everything without exception has a radio signature, without exception, even water and even land. A-50 is a 1980s development. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russians had 11 of them, working, undamaged, adequate. Plus, we understand that the most important system there is that saucer on top called Bumblebee. And there are nuances here. They cannot and will not be able to build anything like that. It is impossible because huge chains of the production complex have degraded. In my opinion, at the moment, if 2 of those 11 machines are in working condition, it's very good for them, as we have completely destroyed 2. Another one was damaged last year and repaired. Now it is at the aircraft plant in Taganrog. And there is no confirmation, but there is a hint that something also hit that factory. That's all. Here we must emphasize the impossibility of building anything like this. The declared A100 claiming to be of the next generation is a myth, it is propaganda. And this is a huge success for us because we are improving missile launch safety. Because this particular machine was able to calculate our aviation at the distance of up to 400, 500 kilometers in the air, and it could calculate ground targets, say a 12 tank convoy, from about 250 to 300 kilometers, not more. But this was a really good tool for their aviation to use such missiles as Ha-1, Ha-35, Ha-59, which can strike from 100 to 300 kilometers. The fact that they stopped working significantly worsens their targeting. As for Su-34s, more than a dozen of them were downed over the past month. It's fantastically good. Only 120 of these aircraft were produced. At the beginning of the war, no more than 100 were in working condition. At least 25 are confirmed to have been downed. I think there were a dozen more, especially at the beginning of the war when it was difficult to keep records, so we have about 35 aircraft. By this particular aircraft, 400 caliber corrected aircraft heavy bombs and POP 1500. Avdiivka might have fallen because there was a fantastic bomb press. There was a day when over 150 bombs were used, an absolute record. I emphasize, an absolute record. In February, 1500 bombs of this caliber were also an absolute record, and they will keep raising it. Therefore, the more shut down planes, the better it is. Besides, there is such a thing as preemptive destruction. What is it? More than a dozen planes were shut down over a month or so, whereas only 6 planes came into service for the whole last year. So preemptive destruction. We are destroying their potential faster than they can replenish it. And how were these aircraft downed? By MIM-104 Patriot. In special configurations, they can operate within the range of 120 and even 140 kilometers. We understand that with the very skillful work of our anti-aircraft missile systems and crews, it is possible to approach 10 kilometers, make quick launches and leave. The endurance range of an Oshkosh 8-wheel drive truck is up to 600 kilometers, and it is exactly within this range that such shutdowns took place.
You've been watching the special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic course, dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find more information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!